I'm opening the floor for questions and comments, but please, very important, let's be brief so that we get the point and Professor can get to comment. Please, Dr. Maha, then Dr. Ahmed, and then the Ambassador Hussam, and then Dr. Adel Bishai. Okay, 5 people.
Okay, thank you very much for the very informative and enlightening presentation and comments. I actually want to highlight things besides the banks and the idea of the financing, because actually, and of course, I will not just talk. I will not talk about the global south. I will just talk about Egypt, because this is where we are all now interested in getting out from the trap we are trapped in. I don't think that we need more finances from banks. We are getting already loans from everywhere, and this is not the issue now. The issue now is, I guess, if we can elaborate more with China, especially based on this long-term relationship and the history between the two countries. We need the technology transfer and the knowledge transfer, because we need to have real manufacturing bases in a lot of things. And I highlighted before in another session that for something like the solar energy, we need to manufacture it from the scratch, but China cannot permit before the stage before the waffles. So if we get this technology, we can actually manufacture the solar panels basically from the sand and from the main components, so we don't have to import anything, and we can be productive, and definitely it will help us. So this is the main question: how can we benefit from the relationship between the two countries in getting better technology transfer and manufacturing base? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. Dr. Ahmed?
Thank you very much. First, I have very quick comments and 3 questions. The very quick comment about the purchasing power. You mentioned that in China, the income per capita is lower than the United States. Although I saw a couple of studies, one of them about India. In India, there are 300 million consumers that have the same purchasing powers as American. And I would expect if the same study was done in China, there will be around 400 to 500. So the purchasing power, consumer purchasing power, although the per capita is lower, but the purchasing power, consumer purchasing power might be higher in those 2 countries. And I would urge you to look at these 2 at this point. The second point I wanted to check, what is the size? I understand that the World Bank is about 500 billion overall capital, while the 2 new banks are around 200 billion. And I would like, if you have a question or if you have an answer, or Filippo, about what is the weight of each one of these development bank as a role in terms of capital and in terms of financing as the global picture. The 3 other questions are as follows. First question is, I want your comment on the Bretton Woods process and what will happen in a multilateral world now with the Chinese coming in. I would like also to understand, because a lot of saying the role of BRICS, okay, that the BRICS could build the current replacement to the US dollar or create a mechanism, which I want your comment on this. I want to understand a little bit. The third point, which is the most important part, where I want also your reflections, both of you and Dr. Abla, of course, is the Egypt strategy. Egypt is entangled between US and China. We are in a period now where they say the geopolitics is actually controlling economy or moving economy. The previous period was economy was driving geopolitics. Now it's different, okay? Egypt is entangled because it has close ties to the US and it has close ties to China, and we are willing to build a policy, and we are entangled between both. We have been trying to balance, but we are not very, we see as opportunistic. My point of view as an opportunistic person, I saw that there is $4.7 billion worth of manufacturing output moving out of China, either by companies relocating or either by companies that actually Chinese companies willing to expand globally. Gatti Shanti India have announced the China Plus strategy, and they are targeted to get $1.3 billion out of this. My idea is that we're able to calculate it, that we can get from 300 to $400 billion of this. This is financial aspects. I'm not sure that the Americans do as much as also the Americans have been pushing for the alternative path, okay, between UAE and Saudi Arabia and Israel. Okay, they have been pushing for this. I would like to understand your comments and your reflection what Egypt's strategy should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Ambassador Hazem.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Professor, for the presentation. Actually, my question is regarding the Chinese reach into the global south bilaterally and the complementarity in the Chinese policy between the multilateral sphere and the bilateral sphere. Is it efficient? Is it effective? And what is your reflection about what has been put forward by some voices in the Western countries, that the Chinese loans and the outreach of China into the southern countries, especially in Africa, has some ulterior motives, and that sometimes these loans are not so benign, and that the purpose behind that is to have further control on the resources and the infrastructure in the southern countries. So your point of view would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Are they ever benign by anybody? That's the question. Dr. Bichet.
Today is a wonderful day, and everything I heard is really wonderful from the speaker and from the comments, very rich comments by Mr. Muhammad Asim and the other gentleman from Roma, Bella Roma. China for me is very special. And although I'm a technical economist who got his degree from Oxford in econometrics, but I believe in history. In 1974, when I was working, teaching at the American University in Cairo after my degree, I was appointed as assistant to the Secretary General of the United Nations World Food Conference by Kurt Waldheim, who was Mr. Said Mar'i, who was number 2 after Mr. Sadat, and who is a top politician. And Said Mar'i was appointed as Secretary General of the World Food Conference because in 1974 there was a horrible problem with food in the sense that in America and in Russia, wheat output fell dramatically, and they talked about the great grain robbery when Russia was borrowing from America, and after the great train robbery, that thing which you may have seen on television. So there was a very serious problem, so much so that it was decided that it was to be handled by the United Nations, not the FAO in Rome, and when it was decided to be handled by the United Nations, Mr. Henry Kissinger came to the conference in Rome, in the Palazzo dei Congressi, and he delivered the speech, and people were commenting that his Minister of Agriculture should speak, but it was so important that Henry Kissinger would deliver it, and Henry Kissinger, when he came to deliver the speech, there were 7 bodyguards standing in front of him in the Palazzo dei Congressi in Roma, which was the only time they did that situation. And the way he entered, I mean, he was really treated specially. And I had, and the whole idea was we didn't want to leave the cure of the very serious problem of food to FAO to create a new institution. So we wanted to create a World Food Council. And Henry Kissinger, and I talked to the assistant of Henry Kissinger. He said, no, I will not put it in his speech. He was very, it was repeated 18 times. So anyway, thanks to Mr. Said Mar'i, he made me sit with Henry Kissinger, and these are the only 18 minutes in my life that I sat with Henry Kissinger. I said, we want to create another.
And there were Chinese in the room?
No, I'll tell you about
let's get to China, please.
So when we created that, we said we will have to make it a UN organization to handle it. Anyway, we had, among the trips we had to do, we had to do a trip to China. And FAO does not, China was never put in, never had a hand in FAO. They didn't have any place. So Said Mari and myself went to China, and in those days, this is 1974, it was 2 years before the death of Mao Zedong. So I saw China with bicycles. We were, the only car was our car, and the car in front of it and the car behind it. And FAO said China will never enter into the new institution you will create. We said, no, we will make them enter through the UN. So when we went to China, I remember going, they took us to each one had guards and other security people around it. So they made us walk in that.
Dr. Bichai, we need, for time consideration, please, let's get to the final point.
The final point
yes,
is,
please.
anyway, we
Thank you.
made China enter into the United Nations system for food, not to leave it to FAO. And we gave them a room in Rome, and China entered in it was the first time that there was a Chinese person in the building of FAO.
Then we have to thank you and Mr. Kissinger for having the Chinese there.
And we dealt with the food issue with China. And China, what I want to say, China, the way she deals with developing countries was well explained by Muhammad Asif. The very calm way in a very soft way to handle things which will benefit the developing countries and benefit them at the same time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Bichai. In the back, please, and then you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much. شكرا دكتور عبلة. شكرا السادة الحضور.
I will translate later. Please go ahead.
الصين قدمت نموذج كبير في التنمية الاقتصادية خلال الثلاث عقود الماضية، وأصبحت من خلال مؤسساتها المالية الكبيرة هي أكبر دائن وأكبر مقرض للدول النامية بالذات، حوالي $1 تريليون. وكان الدخول المجتمع الأوروبي بالذات في هذه المؤسسات وحرصه على دخول هذه المؤسسات المالية الكبيرة كان بيدينا أمل أنها تخضع هذه المؤسسات للحوكمة، حتى لا أنا تعاملت مع الصين وأعمل مع مؤسسات صينية 25 عاما. كلما تعمقت لقيت أن فعلا الفساد في هذه المؤسسات عالي جدا، وحرص الأنظمة الصينية على مساعدة الأنظمة لا تنظر إلى ديمقراطيات ولا شفافية في توقيع الصفقات. وبدليل أننا حتى في مصر نعرف حجم الديون التي منحتها الصين حتى الآن. فلذلك كنا نريد خبرة الدكتور مندز والزملاء على كيف تحويل هذه المؤسسات وإخضاعها للحوكمة حتى لا تصبح هذه الأموال دعما للأنظمة الدكتاتورية والشمولية. المؤسسات الصينية المشاركة فيها الجهات الدولية والدول الكبيرة، خاصة أن العدوان الإسرائيلي على غزة منح الكثير من الشعوب العربية أنها تتعاطف مع الموقف الصيني وتقبل وجود الصين في المنطقة أكبر، ولا تحل محل الولايات المتحدة التي دعمت هذا العدوان خلال الفترة الأخيرة، وبالتالي سينمو دورها رغم تراجعها اقتصاديا خلال المرحلة المقبلة. شكرا جزيلا.
Let me translate the question because I think there was an issue with the translation. He started by saying that China had a very powerful model for economic development that worked very well for 3 decades, and this was through its institutions, and it became the biggest debtor actually for countries. And he's saying many of the institutions that are there do not have proper governance, and there's a lot of corruption involved. And given the present situation, where the Israeli attack on Gaza and the US support for it, and the loss of sympathy for the US in everything that they do, there is this much stronger acceptance of the Chinese in the region, and how can this situation be handled? This is actually the question, please.
Good morning. I wanted to ask, building on a point in your slides, that China is very much present in international organizations. It has a lot of leverage in said organization, but on the other hand, it's creating parallel organizations. So do you see that China has the leverage and power, be it smart and soft power, to create complementarities between those parallel systems to place itself in the center? Or are we beyond a unipolar and bipolar system and moving towards a multipolar system where China will be important but not the most important? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and very well articulated question. Now we're going to give you the floor for comments, Professor, and you have 10 minutes exactly.
Thank you so much. Probably have 20 seconds per question. I'm going to start backwards if you don't mind. Depends on who you're talking to, that they are competing organizations. So actually, if you look at the NDB and the IB, they seem to be more in line because we don't have another system. That's all we have. The multilateral development system that we have, whether we like it or not, is still based on the Bretton Woods idea. So having a new one will be very challenging. Now, when we're talking about other organizations within China, like policy banks, yes, they're a total mess, and China knows that. And I think part of what they want to do with these organizations is to be able to interact with the world more within the global governance framework. The second point, and I'm moving quickly, how to push institutions. Why is there more acceptance on China issues, on China by the Global South? And going back to what you were saying, yes, third world countries, developing countries. We found that a little bit offensive, and I think that's why we use Global South, as in the Global South. Why is there more acceptance? And I think it's partly because the US has a lot of dirty laundry around the region. Speaking of Latin America, China is popular by virtually just simply being marginally better than the US in Latin America, and there is a lot of acceptance for that. And I think dirty laundry will eventually come up. We are focused on giving away natural resources, not adding value to what we have. Bolivia, for example, is giving away its lithium massively, raw lithium to China, selling it, of course. But at the same time, they're not thinking about developing a battery center. It's far to say we want to develop our own Bolivian Tesla. I mean, come on, that's not going to be possible. But how about developing a battery center research for electric batteries? So you have that, and yes, we are not doing that because governments are happy about getting their balance of payments from lots of money temporarily, raw materials, and that's agricultural issues. Chile providing copper, Peru doing the same, and Bolivia doing the same, and the same in Africa. I'm talking about Latin America more because I know the cases much better. But you have a very good point. And how do we get there? How do we get the transfer of technology? We're going to have to talk and have an actual clear public policy at different governments that takes into account that for the long term. Otherwise, this is not going to happen. Everyone wants to talk about it, nearshoring, for example, to reduce the dependency on China, but no one else is able to produce these things. In Latin America, the only thing we can do at the moment is put together cars, not more than that, producing microchips and so on. And for that, you need some serious investment. Historically, yes, Kissinger, 1974, partly because the UN accepted China officially in 1971. That opened all doors. Without the help of the US wanted a two-China policy in 1971. It was actually African countries and Latin American countries that were able to get the UN to accept China and to remove Taiwan in 1971. Kissinger was involved because Nixon wanted to establish diplomatic ties with China, but of course he was in such a mess. They were established in 1979, and that's when China entered the IMF in 1980 and the World Bank and so on. It's a very good point. The question from the ambassador, yeah, the measurement has to be bilateral. Otherwise, we're talking about regions. In Latin America alone, 33 countries. So we analyze it bilaterally, and China is already the largest trading partner of all South America, of all countries in South America. which is incredible. So that's one thing that we need to do. We tend to put the regions, Africa and China, Latin America and China, but we need to look at the specific cases to have some more clear. Do they exercise political control? It depends who you talk to and which government you talk to. I've seen political control being exercised in Ecuador, in Panama, with the elites. And this happens, perhaps not US perhaps style, Cold War, a little more subtle. And I think this is happening, but not that clear. In some cases, Venezuela, for example, my colleague Chris Alden compares Venezuela and Zimbabwe, similar playbooks here, different raw materials, but it's still interesting. Egypt's strategy, I agree with the comment about geopolitics is driving economics. And I think they're both 50-50, but geopolitics has to be taken into account. And the fact that the Egyptians find themselves between the US and China is a massive thing. I will add also Europe. Latin America, we're in the same boat. We are welcoming China. We keep looking to Washington because of the proximity that we have, not only in terms of trade, but also geographical proximity. There was a Mexican politician who used to say, oh, Mexico, so far away from God, so close to the US. And now we're so far away from God, so close to China, and still. What is the weighting of the AIB? There is weighting according to how much shares you have. China has over 27% of the vote, and that's very, very important. India has a very important chunk, but nowhere near China. And of course, other countries have very small shares. For example, there are countries with only $5 million memberships. But for these countries in the Global South, it's important to be a member. It's not so much about the amount, but the membership, what counts. And countries are very proud about that. And that's an important element. I think, can the BRICS take forward? I'm not sure. I think the BRICS idea is very diffuse. We have countries that are going in very different directions. I don't talk too much about the BRICS as a whole. I focus on the NDB because I can measure it. But the BRICS is discussing things about bringing Iran, Argentina into the BRICS Plus and creating an alternative. The NDB is already doing transactions in RMB because it's important for them to bypass the dollar. I'm not suggesting that the NDB is Chinese, but it's based in Shanghai. It's like, that's an important element. And yes, they have more equality in terms of the weighting, but China is still a very important player in that sense. And part of the reason why they allow the Indians to be the first presidency, and then the Brazilians and the Russians, so to emphasize we are not that important, but I think they are more than what we think. What China is helping is this helping what Beijing wants? I think to a certain extent is giving a softer power face to the world, the AIB and the NDB, and I think that's an important element. Going back to my colleague online, why the Global South wants it? Financing infrastructure is very expensive. So any organization that has the word infrastructure in the middle, for us, we love it because that's our hope. We are not connected properly. And again, the case of Latin America is incredible. We're better connected to the US than within our countries. And this is really incredibly needed. And the amount of investment in infrastructure in Latin America is one of the lowest in the entire world. So why this becomes very attractive. Why Europeans want to join? I agree with you, business opportunities. And if you go, and to confirm that, you go to the annual meetings, all these infrastructure companies, a lot of them British, very much looking for contracts and perhaps providing advice as well. The objective is not that clear. It was thought about it at the same time as the BRI, 2013. I think initially we didn't know if it was part of it or not. I think now it's not, but the Chinese lump everything together. China's plans overseas are now all about the BRI, and I think that's part of the reason some countries join. And some countries have no idea what the BRI is. In fact, I was in Panama recently, and one of the ministers of finance said, "Oh, we are members of the bank, the Chinese bank." And I said, "Really?" "Yeah, the BRI is." And I was like, "I'm sorry, BRI is not a bank. The B doesn't stand for bank. He was thinking that he was a member of the AIB, so that was interesting and funny as well. Debt trap, you mentioned, and I'm sorry I'm going so fast because I know we have little time. Massive debt trap from policy banks, and I think that's why China is lending less via policy banks than before, because the perception with white elephant projects, for example, a massive dam, reservoir of water in Ecuador, the airport that you mentioned, billions of dollars, and given by Chinese policy banks, sometimes with very little interest, but they still have to repay these projects, even if they don't work. So that's a very interesting part. I think the Chinese are aware of this and think this is changing, but it is again also difficult to keep track how much money is coming into in debt. We know, for example, that Venezuela has $65 billion in debt with China. There is no way they will be able to repay that back. So I think China knows that and think it's being a little bit more cautious about perception and so on. And I think that's very important. I'm not so sure I would go as far as saying that there is no interference. I think China likes to believe that no interference element more. The more you are involved in IR, the less you are going to be able to stay away from interfering. No way about, the IR forces pulled you in. 2011, China didn't want to say anything about Libya. We don't want to have anything to do with the operation in Libya. We abstain. What happened? 35,000 Chinese citizens were trapped in Libya. How do we get them out? Obviously, you're not going to ask the French or the Americans or the British for help. They ended up getting them out with, smaller countries like Greece and Malta and so on. But they didn't have that capability. Now, 2015, the military base in Djibouti is opened. I have argued that part of the reason behind this military base is not necessarily to attack, but to have a rapid deployment force in the region to be able to operate fast and efficiently. Not necessarily to invade anyone, but again, the more you have a presence overseas, the more interest you will have to defend in your country. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much. You tried very hard to address all issues. Any last words, Filippo? Do you have any last words?
Thank you. No, I just want to say one thing about one of the very important question raised from the audience about if you're heading towards a multipolar order. I think probably this something is already happening. So we know the fact is, if you look at the fact that G7 is no longer representing 70%, 20% of world economy as it was a few years ago, but is only 45%. And the fact that it's not only a reality, but the other countries knows it quite well, and that's why they're enlarging BRICS. Make it very short. So the point is there is a political awareness of the fact that G7 is no longer the far stronger economy in the world.
Relevant. It's no longer relevant, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a matter of fact. It's a matter of fact. And so that is changing already a lot. And we don't know where we are going to end up at the end of the day, but multipolar system, multipolar, I don't know what yet, how to call it, is probably something we're going to experience in the coming years. And we are in transition period. In transition period, many things might happen altogether.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Asen?
Thank you.
Nothing? Nothing to say? We hope that it's going to be a multilateral system. We hope that we're going to hear the voice of the South. The Global South, by the way, has a definition, and it's the entire world, minus the US, Europe, Japan, Israel. This is the official definition. It's everybody. And we hope that one day our voice is going to be heard properly, because until now, we're just playing musical chairs, all right, among the Western countries. And they're always all afraid of China. You want to say something? You're dying to say something. So say.
Just to add that some countries in Europe have similar characteristics to the Global South. So that definition, is especially new members, and in many ways is fluid. That's why we don't accept it.
Western Europe. Let's leave the rest. Okay, the rest is part of it. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Alvaro, for a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Mr. Asen. Thank you, Dr. Filippo, for excellent commentary. We opened the black box. We didn't quite get completely through it, but we are going to continue to do that. I would like to thank Dr. Noor Makawi again for making this possible jointly with us. And I would like to thank Dr. Adel Bishay, Dr. Maha, Dr. Ahmed, Ambassador Hazem for their participation, and everybody else. Thank you all.